This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the parish council to Thursday's National Assembly. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm all right, a little worse for wear.
Yeah?
I never get enough sleep around election times. And in all honesty, that's because I really love election times.
My oldest and dearest friend was messaging me yesterday, completely unprompted, with, put your phone down, go and have a little lie down, don't forget to drink water, breathe, because she's been with me for every election since 1997 and knows exactly what I'll do in terms of burning myself out.
That's brilliant. And it is, however the election goes, there is enjoyment to be had from all the graphs and reactions. And I particularly love, when people are obviously quite sleepless, they've been going from panel to panel for several hours, and about 3:00 in the morning, they start to get quite grumpy with each other and quite unguarded. And sometimes that produces amazing content.
The best stuff, yeah. And just a moment for John Curtis, please. Like, that man,
I know.
he's not a young man anymore, but my God, he's got stamina that the rest of us can only dream of. I want whatever he's having, basically.
I mean, he must have developed some extraordinary skill for just napping in between.
Let's ask him. Let's get him back on the show.
Unless he just snorts massive amounts of drugs.
Which is it, John?
Which...
Right, well, before we begin, this does all feel so momentous that we want to hear from you, our dear listeners. So Alex and I had the idea to do another live event, but this time we're going to do it during the day, during the working week. So Tuesday lunchtime, that's Tuesday 12th of May, from 1 until 2, we're going to host an online Ask Us Anything session. If you want to be there and you're not already a Quiet Riot Pod Ko-Fi backer, to get your invite, you need to head over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod, sign up for about £5 a month, more if you can afford it, but a £5 will absolutely do. And Kenny will then ping you an invite on Monday evening. So you'll need to be signed up by 1 p.m. on Monday. That's going to be 24 hours before the event. And then on Tuesday, grab your sandwich, a pair of headphones, find a little cozy spot in the office and tune in to fire your brilliant questions at us.
So it's a sort of Ask Us Anything election special.
Yeah.
Oh, I like it. Now, we know we are blessed with very well-informed listeners who will have been hoovering up results, reaction, analysis, every podcast going. So we're not going to repeat the factual matrix, I guess, of what happened. We will try to reframe it, however, and look for the angles that maybe all of those concentrating on OMG Labour as the single possible story to emerge from this week might have missed.
Exactly, because every pundit keeps remarking that we're in a different multi-party landscape and then proceeds to frame any learning on the basis of two-party politics. So if we stop doing that, some of the learning, you might be surprised to find, is actually a bit positive.
Yeah. So only one topic today, but 3 different angles. First up, the Holyrood and Senedd results, which deserve much closer attention than simply, what does this mean for Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage?
And then we're going to look at the results in England, which point against the prevailing narrative of a reform tsunami. But how on earth does one poll, model and predict voter behaviour in such a mercurial environment as we now find ourselves in?
And finally, back to the future. What lessons should each political party, and more broadly each political tribe, I guess, take from what happened? And what lessons are they likely to take from what happened?
Let's crack on.
Quiet Riot.
Right, so let's start with the electoral map. Scotland voted, Wales voted, and English councils went to the polls. Some results are still trickling in as we record on Saturday afternoon, so do bear that in mind. And taken together, the picture is genuinely quite historic, I think, but maybe not for the reasons being advanced by traditional media. For the first time, all three devolved nations will be run by a nationalist First Minister, because Northern Ireland, of course, which didn't have elections this week, already has a Sinn Féin First Minister. Is that a coincidence or is it a signal? Let's dig into what actually happened and what on earth it means. Now, Naomi, you have become a little bit of a Wales expert.
No, not expert. No, avid
Okay,
consumer
yes, a
of
little bit.
experts on Wales.
How about a little bit of a Wales watcher?
Sure,
Will
exactly.
you take that
Yeah,
through
I will. So
your
obviously
various specials with
Will
Will? And I
Hayward.
think coming up actually in a couple of weeks, don't you? A sort of
Yeah.
wash up of the election.
Yeah, and look, if we think John Curtis is tired, Will Hayward will be hot on his heels heading to bed. He's put a shift and a half in. So obviously in Wales, we've got Plaid Cymru as the biggest party. They've got 43 seats and they need 49 for a majority. You've got Reform on 34. Remember, they had none in the 2021 general election. The party didn't even exist in its current guise. Green's got 2 seats, which I think they're pretty pleased with. Lib Dems just the one still. And this does mean that Labour, who had controlled the Senedd for 27 years, now don't. They've gone from 35 to 9 seats, and a huge loss for the Tories, who lost 22 seats in this election. They're down to 7, so 2 behind Labour.
But I thought Kemi Badenoch is knocking it out of the park.
Oh,
Maybe.
well, quite, and more on that later. So the Greens obviously are ideologically closest to Plaid in terms of who can prop Plaid up and help them govern. They've got a pretty positive relationship. You know, that could lead to collaboration, though Ron ap Iorwerth, the Plaid leader and First Minister now, said he would prefer a minority government. But even if you add the Greens and the Lib Dems to Plaid, you get 46. That's still 3 short of a majority. Kind of meaning that the brutal irony here is that Labour are the actual kingmaker in Wales, despite being kind of comprehensively humiliated. And of course, notably with Eleanor Morgan going down in history as the first governing leader to lose their own seat. So their 9 seats that the Labour are left with now could push Plaid over the line to 52. But whether that party is capable psychologically of propping up the party that ended their 27-year rule of Welsh Labour is a fascinating and awkward question. So I think the most likely scenario, given what ap Iorwerth has said, is a Plaid minority government, confidence in supply arrangement with Greens, maybe the Lib Dem, and then governing short of a majority and doing deals on an issue-by-issue basis. So, fascinating to watch. A minority government in a 96-seat chamber with Reform as the second biggest bloc. It means we are probably in for a bumpy ride in Wales.
But it will be an interesting one, I think, constitutionally speaking.
Yeah.
Actually, it might be quite a learning experience for Labour to adjust to maybe being the junior partner, to not being in charge.
Yeah.
So it will be interesting to see how.
Absolutely. And similarly, Scotland. So talk us through what you now know that you didn't know when you recorded with Zoe about north of the border.
For me, the startling thing in Scotland is how well the Labour vote has held up compared to what is going on everywhere else.
Yeah, they lost 4 seats, didn't they?
And in terms of percentages against small fry, we're simply not seeing the kind of churn that we're seeing elsewhere. So I wonder if there are actually lessons for the wider Labour Party to learn from there. I know it's a very, very different environment, but obviously Labour did something different and better in terms of defending its share of the vote in Scotland, albeit faced with different forces, as it were. But also Scotland is quite interesting in that if you look at the amount of seats lost by the Conservatives, so the Conservatives lost 19 seats in Scotland, and the SNP lost 6 and Labour lost 4. So Labour are actually the smaller of the losers in Scotland, weirdly. And then we have Reform gaining 17. So they didn't even gain all of the seats that the Conservatives lost. this means that the total of the right-wing bloc, if you want, in Holyrood is actually lower than it was in the last election. I find that quite interesting.
So do I. And of
Again, in
course,
the climate of what's going on.
yeah, and of course, for Labour in Wales, they had the double incumbency problem, which they didn't have in Scotland. There was, of course, frustration at how the country from Westminster is being run, but I think that will have helped. And of course, Anna Sarwar did try to get ahead of that narrative by calling for Starmer to go on more than one occasion to put that distance between Scottish Labour and Westminster Labour. I want to go back to the point that you made at the beginning of the show about all three devolved nations now having nationalist first ministers. This is the first time in the history of devolution that the centre of gravity in every devolved chamber is pointing away from London. So,
Yeah.
a direction of travel. So I'm kind of keen on your take on that. Like, some people say, oh my God, the word united is doing a lot of heavy lifting in the United Kingdom. But on the other hand, then is this not kind of devolution as it was sort of always conceived to work and to be? Could it help the regions and nations feel more empowered?
It could. If it's handled in the right way, I think it could. It's also notable to me how little the question of independence has been discussed, both in the Welsh context, which is not that unusual, but also in the Scottish context. I mean, it's certainly not something that's been front and centre of the SNP campaign. They've gone with other stuff. That doesn't mean the constitutional question is no longer important to them and independence is not important to them. That much is clear. But it has taken a back seat in terms of campaigning. And I wonder if that means that the focus, especially now with those three first ministers in charge of the three nations outside England, whether there is a big push for more devolved powers, for more decentralization of control, for a more equitable relationship between Westminster and the national assemblies. It has the potential to kind of divide the UK and lead to the fraying of bonds, but it also has the potential to kind of make it a little bit healthier and a little bit more of an equal footing. And it will be interesting to see what happens going forward.
Devolution was always supposed to create distinct political cultures, and congratulations, it has now worked. And I think the question is going to be whether Westminster is mature enough to respond to that rather than just resent it. As you say, the risk is that you get devolution as kind of permanent grievance management rather than as greater power sharing. And that's a ratchet that only goes one way. Strong devolved governments are either proof that devolution works or it's an accelerant towards its logical conclusion of a fracture of the UK, and which one is going to depend almost entirely on how Westminster behaves. And to that point, England, of course, is the great anomaly. We don't really have English devolution. It's the dog that didn't bark in the devolution settlement, and it's a dog that's going to start looking very hungry. And I just don't know that we can keep having this conversation about Scottish and Welsh identity without more people adding fuel to the fire of what English political identity is supposed to look like institutionally. And the West Lothian question never went away. It got ignored. You might remember that for a while, after the independence referendum for Scotland in 2014, Cameron's Conservative government brings in evil English votes for English laws, where, of course, Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Irish MPs were not meant to vote on issues that only affected England. And then that gets scrapped in July 2021, again by a Conservative government. So a very awkward move, given it was the Tories who introduced it. And the reason was given that it was complex and cumbersome procedurally, but it created a bit of a two-stage legislative process. And I don't think it was often used in the way it was intended.
The counter-argument to that, I guess, would be that England is so dominant over Westminster politics, over the UK landscape, that the notion of giving it its own national parliament will not equalize things. It will further make them unequal, if you know what I mean.
I think the irony is that Evel was always a sticking plaster over a constitutional wound rather than an answer to the question, because it didn't create an English parliament or any meaningful, like, English political identity. It just gave English MPs a slightly louder veto in certain circumstances. So the situation now is that the West Lothian question, Scottish MPs voting on English matters, while English MPs can't vote on equivalent Scottish matters, for one example, is unresolved and
Mm.
has kind of like no procedural fig leaf over it at all.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Completely off the top of my head, and this may be the stupidest thing ever asked, but is there a way to roll this into House of Lords reform? So if you're talking about either an elected second chamber or a completely reformed second chamber with no life peers, could you introduce a sort of equality of the regions and the nations in the second chamber so that as a legislative stopgap, there is that balance that is lacking in the House of Commons?
There is. I mean, anything is possible, particularly when you have a government with a near 200 seat majority. And it is an intellectually serious constitutional conversation that never seems to quite make it into our mainstream
Mm,
politics. So you could have a Senate of the nations and regions. That's something that often gets talked about. Gordon Brown's 2022 report for Labour proposed something along those lines, an assembly of nations and regions, quite an elegant logic to it. So instead of English devolution requiring a whole new institution of its own, you give English regions a formal voice at the centre alongside Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Irish representatives. I guess the problem with that model, it only works if the regions being represented actually have meaningful power beneath them. So if you create a Senate, but the West Midlands and Yorkshire don't have comparable devolved powers to Scotland, you can end up with people who speak loudly but can't actually do much.
mm, mm,
There is, of course, an English Parliament option, like a kind of fully federal model. And I think it is much harder to leave a federation than it is to exit a kingdom, a United Kingdom. But, could end up being quite lopsided given population figures. England is about 85% of the UK population, so may end up functionally dominating the whole thing, and then you're kind of just replicating everything that's
mm,
wrong
mm.
with Westminster. But yeah, I mean, I think we do have to think of all the different options at the moment, and rolling it into laws reform could be the tidiest constitutional solution available.
Mm.
But it really would require a government willing to spend an enormous amount of political capital. And at the moment, they don't feel like they've got a huge amount. So
I'm asking because it's always seemed a peculiarity for me, coming from a different country, that in this notion of unionism, which is embraced by quite a lot of big parties, implicit in it is a kind of subordination of the other nations rather than a federation of nations
yeah.
on an equal basis. And to me, that is the main thing that is acting as a crowbar to undo the union. I always find it surprising that unionists don't seem to get that. That the biggest enemy to unionism is the refusal to change and acknowledge that other nations need to have an equal stake.
And a lot of the attempts at something like it have failed because they didn't have sufficient teeth. The appetite to sort of be seen to be doing something tends to outstrip the appetite to genuinely give power away to those closest to where that power is used and money is spent, and things like that. So,
Mm.
no, it's the right question to be asking, but I just don't see this government having the kind of emotional resilience to go for it at the moment. Another thing I think we should talk about now that the dust has settled a bit is around no overall control being kind of like the main winner of the night. You've got 54 English councils now under no overall control. This is going to make it extremely difficult to govern some areas. I mean, Birmingham, look at the colour of that map.
Mm.
I just don't know how Birmingham doesn't become the instant cautionary tale. You've got these fragmented chambers across England where the conditions for the next Birmingham are going to be assembled. And we always sort of talked about Birmingham as the council that could go bankrupt, that was in such dire financial straits, rats all over the city because the bins aren't being collected. But the political class moves on to the next story and the residents don't get to. And so you get this
Mm.
asymmetry of consequence that makes the no overall control / reform combination quite dangerous?
I think the no overall control is probably the biggest risk that the fewest people are paying attention to right now, at least. Analysts may get to it. But it seems to me that looking forward to the next general election, if Reform want to continue building momentum, which there are some indications that they are losing at the moment, if they want to continue building momentum, there is a huge perverse incentive to sort of be very obstructionist in those no overall control councils and then just shrug and say, well, we're not in control. And it creates, I think, a massive, massive risk that we will see a lot of very bad situations, a lot of budgets not being approved and things like that.
I think they've got every incentive and now every opportunity. Going into these elections, there were quite a few people on our own side saying, good, let Reform control all these councils ahead of the next election, and then we'll see, the whole country will see how badly they do. And of course, that will be true for the councils that they now control. But the far more dangerous thing that, as you point out, no one has yet really talked about is the fact that they are big players in councils that have no overall control, where they can break local government, be very obstructive, do some very difficult things, and take none of the blame. And I think that is genuinely a concern and something that Reform watchers are going to have to keep a very close eye on and call out when it happens.
Riot. Starting or growing your own business can be intimidating and lonely at times. Your to-do list may feel endless with new tasks, and lists can easily begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything as a built-in business partner can be a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names like Gymshark, Rare Beauty, and Heinz, to brands just getting started. Shopify has hundreds of ready-to-use templates that can help you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style. And you can tackle all the important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. No need to save multiple websites or try to figure out what platform is hosting the tool that you need. And if people haven't heard about your brand, you can get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you, with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns to reach customers wherever they're scrolling or strolling. Start your business today with the industry's best business partner, Shopify, and start hearing. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. That's shopify.com/realm.
Riot. Every headline over the weekend tells us Reform had a great night. And look, they did pick up both seats and votes. But let's apply some actual scrutiny here, because there is a difference between a good night and a transformative one. And the gap between those two things matters enormously for understanding where British politics is actually heading. Alex, help us with the baseline. What were the expectations going into yesterday for Farage's party? What did he actually get? And can we measure those against expectations rather than against the 2020 run results, where, of course, they weren't contesting, to try and determine whether it's a triumph or a slower march than their own spin and momentum suggested?
Look, it's practically impossible, right? Because they are a party that didn't exist during some of those elections or weren't really on the scene in any major way, didn't contest many of the council seats. There is the added complication that you had a mixed bunch of councils this time. So you had some of the councils that had been deferred from the year before. And in that local election, it's the Conservatives that did exceptionally well because they were riding the COVID vaccine wave, if you remember.
Yeah.
And then some of them were 2023 when it had swung completely the opposite way and Labour were doing exceptionally well. So it's really, really hard to disentangle all of that and see what were they expected to do and what did they actually do. I think the most revealing thing for me is to look at how Reform UK is actually framing the results from this week. Let's have a listen to Reform UK spokesperson Zia Yusuf.
This is a historic set of election results. Look, clearly more results are to come in, but if you look at what's already happened, this has never happened before. A start-up insurgent party like Reform demolishing Labour in heartlands like Wigan, demolishing Tory in some of their heartlands like Essex. Well, look, it's been a historic set of election results for Reform and a historic set of results for the country. This has never happened before. A start-up insurgent political party demolishing Labour in their red wall heartlands and simultaneously demolishing the Tories in their former heartlands like Essex. Yeah, look, it's been a historic set of results for Reform. I want to thank the millions of people who turned out. This is a historic moment. No political party, no insurgent political party has ever managed to, for example, defeat and demolish Labour in their heartlands in the red. Look, it's been a historic set of election results. An insurgent startup party demolishing Labour in their heartlands like Wigan and across the Red Wall, and then likewise demolishing the Tories in their heartlands. I think it's already clear this is going to be a historic set of election results in this country. And look, this has never happened before. It's historic because for a start-up insurgent party to be demolishing Labour in some of their heartlands, demolishing the Tories in some of their heartlands, that hasn't happened before.
So the thing they kept repeating is, this is amazing for a startup party. They kept saying, we are insurgents, we're a startup party, we didn't even exist 3 years ago, etc., etc. First of all, that's simply not true, right? Oil of Olay or Coke Zero are not startups. Reform are just the latest name of Farage's political project. They are the best funded political party in the country
in history
and are splurging on advertising in a way that to me seems unprecedented, wraparounds, the Evening Standard and all that stuff. And they are made up increasingly of very experienced Tory politicians who basically ran off stage, changed their rosette and ran back on when, ta-da!
And hit block on all of their old Tory friends on WhatsApp.
Yeah, I mean, listen to the midnight mass special with Zoe Williams that I put out. It contains a simply extraordinary clip of Robert Jenrick reuniting with Victoria Atkins. And so what that says to me is this, okay? If your line is, we are doing brilliantly for a brand new project, which you are not, it means you don't think you can sustain the line, we are doing brilliantly without qualifiers. They always kept adding, we're very new at this. And that reveals a weakness.
I agree. Yeah.
In their own assessment of how they did in their own results. And there was also something hysterical, I thought, to the tone of Nigel Farage when he gave his big conference on the evening when most of the results were known. There was something quite brittle and sort of high pitch and nervous about it. So that's what I'm picking up from it. What are you picking up from it?
Well, I mean, as a commissioner of polling and a hawker of other people's polling, I think that there is a version of Thursday night where Reform underperformed, and it is, of course, nonetheless being written up as a surge, because they performed roughly in line with polling. But polling had priced in a strong night for them. So it's not about whether they did well in absolute terms. They did. The polls said Reform would have a strong night. Reform had a strong night, and that is not a surge. That is an arrival that was already on the destination board. And I think when results match expectations quite perfectly, you don't get to call it a shock. It was not a shock, it was a forecast. And forecasts don't build momentum, surprises do.
Hence the brittleness of the response, I think, a sort of attempt to build it into something that it was not, to say this was amazing.
Yeah.
And it's like, you did great. But it wasn't amazing. If you look at Reform as simply, which in many, many cases it is. I mean, look at Essex. If you look at Reform as simply the party that's come along and replaced the Tories, and there is some evidence of that, even in their composition. They are mostly Tories, both at MP and council level.
And voter.
Yeah. And so if you look at it as that, and you take into account the fact, which I think a lot of people miss, up until really 2019, the Tories had almost 10,000 councillors. They were by far and away the dominant force across English councils. Beyond compare. Anyone else was thousands and thousands of councillors behind them. And so they've experienced an extraordinary decline. What I'm trying to say is that it is England's habit to vote conservatively for local councils.
And while we're sticking with conservative in the widest definition of the word, one of the more intriguing subplots of the night was playing out in Norfolk, which, does lean leave, leans Tory, leans reform, leans restore UK. And this is where Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain party, which ran locally under a banner of Great Yarmouth First, got all 10 of the Norfolk County Council seats in the Great Yarmouth area. Now, remember, Rupert Lowe, originally elected as a Reform MP for Great Yarmouth, then gets suspended by the party over bullying allegations, aka trying to challenge Nigel Farage. And he has been building Restore Britain as this distinct rival right-wing force. And they had their first meaningful electoral tests. And the results are significant beyond Great Yarmouth for this reason. Reform won most of the seats across Norfolk. They got 40, but that left them 3 seats short of a majority on the county council, largely due to the efforts of Restore and a bit the Lib Dems. So you have this...
And the Greens, they got
yeah. And you have this quite remarkable situation where a breakaway faction from Reform is directly costing Reform outright control of a council. And the two parties of the populist right are cannibalizing each other. And Norfolk is where that dynamic is now playing out very visibly. I don't think any of us is saying Restore Britain is a genuine national threat, or that a Rupert Lowe vanity exercise built on a local profile is the question that follows on from it. But it is a headache for Farage that nobody in Reform and the surge around them narrative is talking about. And there kind of isn't anything to stop a Rupert Lowe mimic doing something similar elsewhere in the country.
That's true, actually. You could see a lot of independent sort of coalitions of people for whom Reform is not right-wing enough in those kinds of areas. What I find really interesting about that is even on Friday morning, Farage was saying that Reform were going to win control of Norfolk, this is the quote, by an extraordinary margin. So he wasn't just saying they were going to win, he was saying they were going to smash it, and then they ended up not managing to take control at all. So I think it's also a symptom of their naivety and their lack of expectation management and the kind of bullshiness that gets a little bit in the way of being a bit more modest, which we know voters don't particularly like. British voters don't particularly like this MAGA, cock-swinging attitude. It doesn't work for Britain.
No. And of course, you could now see Restore locally in the Norfolk County Council doing the very thing that we talked about in the previous topic about Reform and no overall control areas disrupting the ability of the other parties to deliver for that area. The same could be true here. You've got a highly motivated man wanting to puncture Farage's reputation and lead. They have every incentive and certainly huge opportunity to try and frame reformers as poor performers in what they're really hoping are going to be their strongest heartlands come the next general election.
And as you dig down into what actually happened, you do find a lot of examples like that. I think Malcolm offered losing out on Inverclyde to the SNP. He was their biggest bet, really, for doing it. You have a spate of new Reform councillors already being sacked. If you're on Blue Sky, go and look at the Reform Exposed account on Blue Sky, which is keeping a tally of these people who are getting elected. And as soon as they get elected, someone points to they're denying the Holocaust on Facebook or something like that, and they get sacked within hours of being elected. There's a whole kind of list of them. The leader of Solihull Council, who defected from the Tories only last year and became Reform's leader in Solihull, he lost his seat in this round of elections. And the biggest elephant in the room, I guess, is Reform flopped in London. They did terribly in London. They managed Havering, but I think Havering has more in common with Essex than the rest of London, both in terms of its voter composition, but also in terms of its conservative tradition. So it was again a straight swap, just like it was in Essex. I know it's fashionable to bash London, but it still yields a total of 75 MPs. They badly lost in like the top target seat of Bexley by 29 seats to 7. So their surge, as it were, is by no means uniform, where people get together and have a clarity of how to fight them they really are causing some embarrassing results for them.
Quiet, Riot. Quiet, Riot.
This leads us to the ceiling question and whether there is this natural ceiling on reform support that they might be starting to bump up against. And I do think that if your voters are disproportionately older, disproportionately male, and disproportionately concentrated in specific geographical areas, you do have a coalition with a natural limit.
Mm.
And I think we are now starting to see them bump up against the edges of their own demography. And particularly when you look at somewhere like London, which lazily you would say, oh, outer London, older, whiter, might skew further right. But that is bumping up against the housing crisis, which is exporting younger, more highly educated, more diverse populations out to the edges, where, of course, they have a big vote.
I found Peter Kellner's point very interesting, that Reform's conversion rate is quite a bit worse than last year, almost 10% worse than last year.
Do you mean last year's locals or the 2024
Last year's locals,
Right.
last year's locals. If you compare the seats they're targeting with the seats they're winning, last year their conversion rate was 41%, this year is 33%. We have seen their overall voting intention polling come down by about 6 to 7 points steadily over the last 6-7 months. October really was their high on 31%. And since then, it's started to erode, and they're now bumping around on 25-26%. Farage's ratings as possible PM are not moving, and that's a big indication that people may vote for them in local councils, but maybe the calculation will be quite different when it comes to giving him the keys to Downing Street. And you see that. I mean, I know projecting into a general election from this set of local elections is problematic. I accept all the caveats fully, but it's still a better guess than something that is not based on any data whatsoever. These are real results. You are seeing real votes, real movement, real turnout. And so I remember that last autumn, there were projections that if their poll rating was replicated, if how they were performing in local elections was replicated on a national stage, they would be catapulted to a huge majority in the Commons. The current model is showing them not quite getting a majority, like falling short by about 40 seats, even on the current vote share. And also the national equivalent vote has come down since last local elections, when it was 31% exactly, and it's now on 27%. And so there is a ceiling, and I don't think they're beginning to hit it. I think they've hit it and beginning to come down from it.
I think modelling is going to become increasingly difficult. I think the polling was actually pretty decent this week. I don't think the problem so much was the polls, but the fact that in a 6-party system under first past the post, even accurate polling will translate into pretty unpredictable seat outcomes. So, as I understand it, gossip on the WhatsApps is that the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, are this weekend doing a huge push on number 10 around proportional representation off the back of the results that happened over Thursday and Friday and Saturday. But why do I say I think it's going to become increasingly difficult? Because when we look at how particularly MRP models work, you are going to take a lot of input data. So demographic data, Office for National Statistics data, census data, and it allows you to infer a probability based on a characteristic. So you are a man in his 50s with a postgraduate degree living in the borough of Southwark. We will infer a probability of 80% chance of being in favour of this policy or that party or whatever. And then you do the stratification, how many people who look like him live within the boundary that we are analysing. But my team did some really great vox pops recently in Danny Kruger's seat. They went to Marlborough, and what they found was that people who look and sound identical were behaving very, very differently. So, for instance, you might have a 70-year-old woman or a woman in her 70s who says, oh, I love Danny Kruger. He's been a wonderful constituency MP. If he's moved from Tories to Reform, so shall I. And then you'll speak to another woman, same socioeconomic background, same haircut, same age, may well even live on the same street, so be it within the same postcode. And she will be saying, Marlborough is a conservative seat. We are conservatives here. We do not accept this sort of far right narrative. No, we are true conservatives and we're going to vote conservative. And so I don't know how the models, the predicting seat outcome models, are going to be able now. And for that example, you can as easily say, the young, highly educated, mixed race person choosing between the Greens or the SNP or Plaid Cymru or even the Liberal Democrats in some areas, or sticking with Labour. It's going to be increasingly difficult. And that could also be good for the political parties, right? It could force them to target broader issues or find policies that can coalesce.
It would force them to govern, Naomi, rather than triangulate.
Yeah. Yeah, pick a bloody side.
Yeah. And the example you mentioned, the difference might be that one of those two neighbors that look and sound identical is more plugged into American politics and has more awareness of what MAGA is doing over there and doesn't want the same thing over here. It might be that they have a child that's working in the NHS. It could be a host of things. The point is, I think people are getting flightier because the loyalty to a particular party is not there. People are quite prepared to change the way they allocate their vote, depending on what's going on right now.
And I think Philly really showed that.
Yeah.
It was a proof point for people that, there is a left-wing alternative that can win.
And that for me is actually a really important point, because all the models and our electoral system, let's be honest, they are designed for a two-party environment. And the reason they no longer work is because of that two-party environment. And our media is very much used to a two-party framing and needs to get out of that habit. Even an ostensibly progressive outfit like the newsagents, I saw the line they put out for their election wash-up podcast this morning, and it was, I quote, "This wasn't an election in the traditional sense of the word, it was more of an arson attack. Farage and Polanski invited people up and down the country to burn down the system, and voters responded saying, yes, we will." That's the end of her quote. So that starts from the point of view that voting for anyone other than Conservative or Labour is torching the system.
Yeah.
And it's a point that I was a little bit disappointed. Zach Polanski actually echoed, like the line he gave to the media. Actually, let's have a little listen to it.
Two-party politics is not just dying, it is dead and it is buried. And actually, whether it's here that Labour have been rejected or whether we're seeing around the country, it's very clear that the new politics is the Green Party versus Reform. I said that the Green Party were going to replace Labour. That's exactly what we did in Gorton and Denton. It's what we've done in Hackney, and we're seeing that right across the country. In fact, in almost all of our seats, right across the country, whether they're target or non-target, the Green Party vote share is rising.
So his main line to the press was, the Greens are replacing Labour, and the fight is now Green versus Reform.
I know, no, it's funnier than that. And I screamed at the TV when he said it. He said two-party politics is dead and buried. It's now between the Green Party and Reform. It's like, but so is it dead or isn't it, Zach?
Yeah, is that what we're looking for? Even starker, more binary choices with even higher stakes. It's not what I'm looking for.
No.
I want the Greens to beat Labour with their policies. I want the Greens to offer a different option to people who are more left-leaning than Labour. I want plurality. I don't want another two parties to come along that basically mean either fascism or Greens.
Indeed, either left or right-wing populism.
That doesn't seem to me like progress.
And so to what extent is the media doing Reform's work for them and propelling their narrative? I mean, we talk about this quite a bit on the show, but there have been some quite extraordinary statistics about just how many more headlines have covered Reform than any of the other parties almost combined.
The vibe in everything I've consumed in the last 48 hours, with very, very few exceptions, I mean, even people like Andrew Marr, who I actually have quite a lot of respect for, they are behaving as if Nigel Farage is the next prime minister, end of. And I think that's a very, very strange position to be taking for a progressive person. It's quite fatalistic. It's disempowering. It's telling people don't bother. It's a done deal. I mean, I know we'll come to talk about Gordon Brown and Harriet Harman being brought in, but someone said to me on that appointment that it's a little bit like bringing Sam Allardyce in when you're in the relegation zone with 5 games to go. And my response was, yes, but we are at a point in the electoral cycle where there are 24 games to go of the 38. It's not 5 games to go. People are catastrophizing and fast forwarding to this thing as an inevitability. I too feel it sometimes. I have to admit. I too feel sometimes that maybe this country has a bit of a fascist itch that it needs to scratch and there's nothing we can do about it in my darkest moments. But that is the main thing we have to fight, right? That is the main thing we have to internally push against. Not a single vote has been cast yet for the next general election.
Yeah, and also when you look at the numbers, very, very starkly, you've got a clear picture that, yes, Reform had the largest vote share, but the rest of them are just all bunched right up behind them. And so there is not a majority in the country for a very right-wing / far-right / quasi neo-fascist government. There simply isn't. What there is a Labour Party leadership refusing to acknowledge the fragmentation, chasing Reform voters while actually losing voters to other parties under a completely ridiculous and outdated system that is in their gift to change, and yet they won't do it.
Quiet, Riot.
Hey, I like your new RAV4.
Thanks, yours too.
What does RAV stand for anyway?
To me, it's the Remarkably Advanced Vehicle.
Really? To me, it's the runway approved vehicle for its amazing style.
What about Remarkably Adaptable Vehicle because of its versatile cargo space?
Or really admired vehicle?
Oh, or Really Awesome Vehicle.
It really is the recreational activity vehicle. The stylish 2026 Toyota RAV4 Limited. What's your RAV4?
Quiet, Riot.
And now we get to the question that Westminster has been dancing around for months, and which this weekend's results make impossible to ignore. How long does Keir Starmer stay as Labour leader? Who comes next? And is the internal warfare already underway? Because the signals are getting very loud, and perhaps they should be getting louder in some of the other political parties too. Alex, let's start with Gordon Brown and Harriet Harman being brought back into the fold with special envoy status for finance, trade, and violence against women and girls. It's not a coincidence. So what is it telling us about Operation Save Starmer that is calling in the big beasts? And is there a universe in which their blessing can help him?
I don't know if it's their blessing that can help him. I don't know if it's a feature of Operation Save Starmer. All I can say is that for quite a long time, we've been saying, God, Starmer is so bad at politics and so inexperienced. And he's now brought in some people who are manifestly better at politics and have as much experience as anyone could possibly have. And I think a lot of the criticism of them being brought in as advisors seems to me to have a significant layer of ageism underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen a lot of takes that basically imply that someone like Gordon Brown and Harriet Harman could not possibly have fresh ideas. They are looking backwards rather than looking to the future. And I think especially in the case of Gordon Brown, that is just grossly unfair, considering the afterlife he has had after not being prime minister any longer, considering the work he has done on things like child poverty, constitutional reform, press regulation. I think Gordon Brown is one of the most thoughtful and visionary politicians that Starmer could possibly have access to. And so I don't understand the criticism other than in very superficial terms. I think a lot of people start from the point of wanting to criticize anything that Starmer does, even though it is the thing they've been calling for, and then find ways to rationalize it.
So, yeah, it doesn't scream new blood and fresh start in a way.
Yeah.
And I say that as somebody who loves Gordon very much, and I think it is a very good thing that Starmer is seeking his advice. But I guess I wouldn't make such a media event out of it. It wasn't that the public, and certainly not the media, that really feel in love with him. So I think it is definitely not bad in itself. I think it's only good if it's one of a dozen things, of which this will be, like, I don't know, the seventh most notable thing that they do. Because Number 10 have made it look like their sole and primary response to what happened on Thursday night is, oh right, it's okay because we're bringing a former prime minister back in. So it's kind of the pomp they've put around it that I don't know will be as helpful as the advice itself will undoubtedly be if he takes it, because they are both sage political figures.
I'm not passing judgment on what they might or might not do, because I don't know under what terms they've been brought in and whether they will be genuinely listened to. And those things are quite key.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that to simply look at those two people and dismiss them as the past.
Yeah, no, there is a terrible age.
Is quite distasteful to me. Mm-hmm. And also, I can really see the flip side as well, where he brings in a couple of unknown 22-year-old visionaries and everyone criticizes him for that. So, let's just see what they do. Let's just see what they can offer to him and whether he takes it before we have criticism of them in principle. Let's look at the product. Let's look at the actual work, which is something that I think everyone deserves of whatever age, but is rarely afforded to people who are experienced. I mean, he's bringing in experience. He could not bring in more experienced people than those two. And in Harriet Harman's case, also very media savvy.
And in Gordon Brown's case, couldn't be further from the Morgan McSweeney agenda.
Yeah, and a lot of people are going, oh, the New Labour. I mean, to look at Gordon Brown both within the New Labour outfit, but especially in the way he has developed since.
You cannot level Blair as him.
You don't really understand those terms, if that's the allegation you're making. So we'll see. Personally, I think a lot of people get wrapped up on whether it is fair on Starmer that the country seems to have taken such a dislike to him. And that is an assessment for the history books, in my view. The fact is that the country has taken a dislike to him. Yeah. And sort of to deny that, or to say, well, we can't get rid of them because it would be terribly unfair, it's not politics. You have to take the facts as you find them. So one of the reasons people are not defenestrating Starmer is that no one really wants to stick their head above the parapet, and several campaigns don't actually seem ready. So is there any prospect of that down the line, Naomi? Like, whose campaign is shaping up best at the moment?
I think the easiest way to describe it is that the soft left are in their usual completely disorganised disarray within the Labour movement. Their candidate, Andy Burnham, currently has no seat in Parliament. It is not clear that he can get one in the time frame that would be on offer, given where other candidates might be and when they might move.
Or that the NEC would let him.
Well, he could resign from the mayoralty, in which case the NEC don't block. Secondly, I'm told that the union rep on the NEC, one of them's been switched out and is more favourable to him, and that at least one other person has changed their mind and wouldn't vote the way they did over Gorton and Denton because they feel that was the wrong call and that the Labour Party would have held that seat if he'd been the candidate. What we are now hearing is that the West Streeting team, and it was very notable to me on Friday, after most of the cabinet had come out and supported publicly Starmer on their own social media feeds, Wes did not until very late in the day, and then it was a very, very damning with faint praise kind of remark. We're told that the Streeting gang want to hold off until at least June, when the MPs come back after the next recess, before making any kind of overt move. And I suppose that the view is that if Burnham isn't going to have a route into the Commons, it will shift some of his support. And Wes's coalition is broadly the old Blairite right, the kind of more liberal wing of the parliamentary party. And if he can add in the group who are basically saying, oh my God, anything is better than this, who would currently prefer Andy, then he has a shot of making it. And they feel that they would need a bit more time to kind of prove that Burnham hasn't got a route before trying to mop up that support. That group are also not swinging in behind Angela Rayner yet, because they are holding out for the person they really want, who is Andy Burnham. And there is talk about right-wing media will just so try to destroy her that it would make it an extremely difficult manoeuvre. And then you've got people like Ed Miliband, who it was reported had gone to Starmer and said, you've got to lay out your exit strategy. We need to know, we need to tell the country that you will be going at a point and plan for that.
Yeah, can I ask you something? Could Harman and Brown coming in, however it is displayed publicly, could they be part of that kind of planning in truth? Could they have been brought in to advise how to transition, how to handle the timing, how to handle the contest, etc.?
Look, these are people that will have been advising MPs and certainly those within their own tribe within Labour anyway, right? They will have been having those chats with them and talking about routes forward. So I don't know that the appointments do anything other than attempt to signal to backbenchers who are desperately worried that, okay, look, there is something happening. We are listening more to soft left voices. Things are going to change. It will improve. But it does feel like a very Starmerite response. And certainly from what I can tell, from what's been written by journalists who are being WhatsApped by ministers as well as backbenchers, is that this is just not going to be enough from Starmer. This is not what they wanted to allay their fears.
Yeah, and yet 99% of it is anonymous, which I also find quite interesting.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people expressing severe dissatisfaction and unhappiness, but not putting their name to it. So,
Quite.
yeah.
Let's move on to the Tories and Kemi Badenoch. I mean, it is a bit delulu, isn't it? I mean, just from her, but from all of them, really, that they're out defending their results as signs of a comeback, and therefore she is totally safe. I mean, planet do they now live on?
Yeah, so I don't think she's totally safe. MPs have a dual focus. They do look at what's happening on the national level. They do look at her performances at PMQs, but they are also aware that those things count for naught when it comes to their local constituency. And I think the thing they will be looking at most closely is councillors, members, canvassers, their local representatives being wiped out and incredibly unhappy. And so I wouldn't be surprised if what we saw in the next couple of weeks, I would say, is another spate of Tory MP defections. I am fully expecting it. I look at some local areas of MPs in relatively marginal seats, and I think you've got to be sweating about the next general election. And switching to reform is such an easy solution for them because suddenly they get to consolidate that right-wing vote. It seems a very attractive proposition for some people, at least, not to try to go that way. And if we get 4 or 5 going to reform, there starts the next crisis for Kemi Badenoch.
Yep.
And we know that her general reaction is to come out and say, good riddance.
Yep.
And that is not going to wash with them. So interestingly, I think that she's in quite a lot of peril, and probably an increased amount of peril for everyone seemingly convinced that she's in no peril at all. If she has drunk that Kool-Aid...
Let's look quickly then at the Lib Dems. So the Lib Dem Facebook groups are certainly full of unhappy members, and I know that there has been quite a lot of tension within the parliamentary party over the last year or so too. And I think if I took anything from the results for them on Thursday night, you've got a very interesting picture emerging, which I've kind of long leveled at the Davey leadership, which is that he has very successfully turned the party into the national branch of the South West London Liberal Democrat Party. What do I mean by that? Well,
I know what you mean by that.
It is the totalitarian state of Richmond. You have got both MPs and 54 out of 54 councillors are Lib Dem. No official opposition, no scrutiny. Meanwhile, they lost control of Hull. What is the benefit of having such takeover in one part of the country when you're losing in another part? And I think he is going to come under increasing pressure to have much more of a national message. And the tension there in the party membership is very, very live at the moment against this, running 72 local elections rather than a nationwide general one. And then let's just have a little quick chat about the Greens. Zach Plansky, he started the week poorly. He had this awful write-up in the Times about having sort of fraudulently claimed to be a representative spokesperson for the British Red Cross, for the campaign group Make Votes Matter for PR. The Royal College of Hypnotherapists said he was never qualified, yet he had claimed that he was. And there was also talk about whether or not he had paid sufficient council tax or any council tax on his narrowboat. So he started the week with quite a lot of fire coming at him from the right-wing media and people kind of claiming that he is also an emperor who wears no clothes, but obviously finishes the week having led a party to some pretty stunning victories in the elections, and does come up, the leadership was for a year. So he was elected last autumn. That comes up again this year. I think he's probably extremely safe out of the party leaders that we've discussed so far. But there is tension within the Greens about the direction of travel that he is taking the party in versus somebody like Caroline Lucas and how they would have done it.
I mean, I think Zach has done an exceptional job in a very, very short time. I think the press attacks are largely to be expected. Quite a lot of them are confected, in my view. You look at anyone's past, you're going to find 2 or 3 instances of them doing or saying the wrong thing. I mean, no one is a saint. But the focus on him, in a way, is an indication of how strongly he's performed, because the Times wouldn't really bother with any other Green leader, would they?
No.
And so the fact that he's now a big splash and a hatchet job topic for the Times is an indication that the Greens of England and Wales are growing up, and these are growing pains, and maybe he will respond to them in the right way. Maybe he won't, I don't know.
Yeah.
But growing they are for sure, and it's nice to have that alternative option. I would quite like to see them adopt a slightly less confrontational attitude when it comes to other progressive parties, because I think that is the bit of Zach and the bit of the Greens that feels inauthentic to me. And I notice it. It's like they're doing it on purpose because they've decided to be all fighty, but it's an act. And anything that's inauthentic doesn't come off well. On the Lib Dems, I mean, Jesus Christ, I lose patience with them. I know they're kind of vanilla and shouldn't excite passion in me, but I saw a Lib Dem MP being interviewed, and someone said to him, people are talking about the possibility of Nigel Farage as the next Prime Minister, the possibility even of Zach Polanski as the next Prime Minister. Why is nobody talking about Ed Davey as the next Prime Minister? And shouldn't they be talking about Ed Davey as the next Prime Minister? And their response was, well, we're not going to complain about not being put in the same box as Nigel Farage and Zach Polanski.
Well, look, he's not going to be the next Prime Minister.
No, but someone could.
Yeah, Layla Moran could.
The pitch is so perfectly rolled for a dynamic Lib Dem party with a charismatic and bolshy leader to mop up votes up and down the country.
I agree. And it has historically done very well in Wales and Scotland and parts of the southwest where Reform are eating into that. You had Shetland being lost by the Lib Dems to the SNP for the first time since, I think, like 1950 or something, or maybe even longer than that. So, I agree. I think that the words dynamic and charismatic can never, ever be levelled at Ed Davey.
I liked Ed Davey. I like him as a person. I like his backstory. I like his interventions in terms of content. But the general vibe from the party, you get the Greens go from 4 to 20 in the space of 6 months. You get Reform going from 10 to 30. It is such a fluid environment. And for them to look at that and say, we're just going to continue to build 10 seats at a time until we are in power in 2050. Come on. You find yourself in a completely different landscape. Respond to it.
Right, that is it, Alex. I'm calling time on this week's Sunday School. Thank you, as ever, for joining me. And listeners, remember, get signed up at ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod by 1 p.m. on Monday to get your invite to our Tuesday lunchtime Ask Us Anything live online event.
Now, we have done a few weekend and evening events recently, so we wanted to give those who can't make those times because they have evening responsibilities a chance to join during the working day. And we absolutely love seeing your gorgeous faces and answering your brilliant questions. So please do join us if you can. Remember that coffee backers also get access to our Discord channel where you can chat with fellow Quiet Rioters.
If you can't make it, fret not. We will be back on Thursday as usual with the main show, unless something absolutely mega happens before then, which is not improbable, let's face it.
I wonder what you have in mind. We love you all lots and lots and lots. Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simone Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot.
The bog is valuable texting time, if it is anything, isn't it?
Of course, everybody does. Especially if you go to the pub or something.
The really difficult one is if you're talking to someone and then you're trying to find a way to flush.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm in the garden. It's a water feature.